4 African-American women artists that you should know with our special guest tonight, Dr. Amalia Amaki. Before we get started with our program, I would like to take a minute just to thank our funders. You can see them up there on the screen. The Bernice and David E. Davis Art Foundation, the Cleveland Foundation, the Gunn Foundation, the Zufall Foundation, the Ohio Arts Council, and the participants and members of Cuyahoga County through Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. We are broadcasting this live on Facebook tonight. We did have more people sign on than we actually can fit on the webinar. We can accommodate a little over 100. I just want to let people know we do this because we've discovered with the virtual programs that we lose an average of about 1/3 of the people who sign up. They just never come on. So if we limited the amount of people that signed up, then we wouldn't reach our maximum. So we're hoping that that doesn't cause us problems tonight, but the broadcasting live on Facebook does allow other people who've been bounced off to come on and see us on Facebook. And just so everyone knows, we are recording this and we will make the recording available through our website and through YouTube and through Facebook, probably about a week after. It takes us a little while to get through and just edit out anything that you don't want to see, like all of us chatting before we start. I'd like to get started and introduce our staff. I'm going to start with our collections registrar, Kelly Pontoni. And thanks, Kelly. Kelly just waved at you. Kelly does a great job handling some tech issues sometimes when we have them, and we're really happy that she's on. And I'm going to introduce next our manager of marketing and programming, Megan Elves. Megan's going to go through some Zoom housekeeping for the audience and explanation of how Q&A is going to work tonight.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the program tonight. I know you are all very familiar with Zoom at this point, but I'm just going to go through a couple of specifics for the webinar itself. First off, we should have the view handled for you, so active speaker view. And then if you have any problems, just go ahead and put them in the chat function. Speaking of the chat function, we do have that indicated by a little bubble. And what you can do in the chat is actually send messages either to all attendees, that's everybody, or all panelists, or both. So when you chat to the all attendees, just kind of keep it sparing. So it's sort of like class, you don't want to talk too much during it. And then a panelist, do you have a message for us? Then please, by all means, I'll put any problems in there too. We'll try to help you out. And the other thing too with this webinar is we're going to have a live Q&A at the end. How we're going to run that is go ahead, if you have a question for Amalia, raise your hand. At the end of the webinar, we'll hold the questions to the end. We'll go ahead and promote you temporarily to our panelists. And at that time, you can either ask the question out loud by unmuting yourself, or we could see you too if you unclick your video too. That's going to be up to you, the option. If you don't want to actually ask the question out loud, you're also welcome to type it into the Q&A function, sometimes at the bottom of the screen for Zoom. In there, make sure to just type the question out and we'll go ahead and answer those in order at the end. I'll read them out loud, so if you really want to be discreet, you don't have to do any interfacing. Outside of that, yeah, sit back, relax, and thank you so much for coming here tonight. We're so looking forward to Amalia speaking. And with that, here is Mindy Towsley to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Megan. So we're presenting tonight's program in honor of National Women's History Month, and we especially wanted to honor African-American women artists. It's been really hard for women artists to break through the barriers of major museum collections, and it's been doubly hard for women of color to do so. And I'm going to just rattle off 2 sets of statistics that I got today from the Museum of Women in the Arts. In 2018, just 11% of all acquisitions and 14% of exhibitions at 26 prominent U.S. museums over the past decade were of work by female artists. In 18 major museums, as of 2018, 87% of the artists were male and 85% of the artists were white. So there's still a lot of barriers to be broken down, and it's happening gradually. It's happening mainly in small regional museums like the archives, small arts organizations, but the big museums still have a ways to go. So I'm really thrilled to have our guest speaker, Dr. Amalia Amaki, with us tonight. Those of you who attended the Scene Unseen exhibition at the Archives in 2019 may remember her work, which was part of the Carrie and C. Betty Davis collection. And the piece that's up on your screen on the left was one of her pieces from the Davis collection that we were able to exhibit during that show. Amalia is an artist, art historian, curator, and writer. She received a BA in journalism from Georgia State University, a BA in photography from the University of New Mexico, and an MA and PhD in modern American art and culture from Emory University's Institute of Liberal Arts. She's taught at Spelman and Morehouse Colleges, University of North Georgia, University of Delaware, University of Alabama. She's taught photography at Student Art Centers International in Florence, Italy. She's curated numerous exhibitions and was the former chief curator of the Paul R. Jones Art Collection. Publications that she has authored include A Century of African American Art, the Paul R. Jones Collection, Hal Woodruff, Nancy Elizabeth Prophet, and the Academy, and a couple of books on Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and the Tuskegee, Alabama. She's also published books of poetry and art of her own work. She's a very accomplished artist with an international following. Her work explores African American life and culture through the use of photography combined with mixed media objects, particularly buttons, and there's reasons for her using all of those things. The mixed media approach redefines the lives of past and present African American heroines and heroes and contrasts their depiction in the mainstream media. She has more than 30 solo shows, including a retrospective at the National Museum for Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C., and the Spelman College of Fine Arts. She was also awarded an NEA grant or an NEA fellowship in photography. And highlights from her public art commissions include the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta, Georgia, Valdosta State University, and the 1996 Olympics. Her works can be found in many private art collections throughout the world and are in the permanent collection of the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Texas, the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Minnesota Museum of American Art in St. Paul, Minnesota, the University of Delaware in Newark, Delaware. And that's just a small sampling of the list. So we are so excited to have her here tonight. She is an amazing woman. She's an amazing artist, and she's more than qualified to be on this little program of the Archives. Amalia, I want to thank you so much for coming tonight. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to try to get this first image up. Let's see. Can everyone see that? Don't say no.
I have to say no.
Okay. Let's see.
But that's okay.
Okay.
Try it again.
Okay. Okay, what did I do?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
So just go down to the green button at the bottom with.
Okay, my green button is gone. So let's see.
Oh, okay.
Let me try this. Okay. Uh-oh.
Let's see if there's something.
I'm doing some.
Okay.
And we practiced.
No worries, we'll get it.
Yeah, we'll get it.
No worries.
Let's see.
All right.
It always goes perfect in practice, and then when you really do it, there's something that goes wrong.
It's totally fine.
Can I just stop and let you do it, and I'll start talking? How's that?
Oh, okay.
Do you see the bar at the bottom of your screen? Do you see the bar with all the other icons?
No, I don't. No.
Okay, so maybe maximize your screen.
Let's see. Okay, let's
probably hit it.
Okay, I can't remember our process now. Share screen, is that it?
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, we're on our way.
Are we on the way?
We are. You're up. Look at that.
Okay. Are we there?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Thank you for your patience.
Present it, Will.
Thank you for your patience. And first, just a quick sentence on why Augusta Savage, Norma Morgan, Nancy Prophet, and Camille Billops were selected, were my choices. They appeal to me because they made such unorthodox, unexpected, personal decisions for the sake of their art careers, and they did it without blinking. They confronted racial and gender bias that attempted to minimize their visibility and talent, with sometimes acts that others would have considered to be sacrificial. They did not see them as sacrificial. They saw them not only as necessary, but their right as human creative beings. So for that reason, they stood out for me. And I was very much intrigued by all of the things that they engaged in, with the bottom line motive being making art. Augusta Savage was in many ways a quiet warrior, defying her father's disinterest in art making when she was a very young girl, and making the decision well before her teens that one day she would make things. She left Florida in 1920 to map out her own path into the Harlem art world. She excelled as a student at Cooper Union. She completed the 4-year program in just 3 years. And when her prestigious scholarship to the Fontainebleau School of Fine Arts in Paris was rescinded for racial reasons, she went to work. She exposed the all-white, all-male selection committee in America that was responsible in the Amsterdam News, the New York Times, the Negro World, and several other notable newspapers. She did receive a Julius Rosenwald Fellowship in 1929. She was determined to go to Paris. She also received a second fellowship in 1930. I'm sorry, I should be showing you her. In 1930, that allowed her to experience beyond Paris in other parts of France, in Germany, and in Belgium. While she was in Paris, she exhibited at such places as the Grand Palais, among other prestigious venues. She engaged in interactions with members of the Negro colony in Paris. She got the attention of and the company of many important teachers and artists who were on the French art scene. And she made art. And one of the people that she encountered in Paris that was an interesting meet that did not quite turn out the way she expected, but it benefited her travels anyway, and that was Nancy Prophet. She arrived at Nancy Prophet's studio at the recommendation of W.B. Du Bois. W.B. Du Bois forgot to tell Nancy Prophet. So their initial meeting was a bit strained, but Savage later commented that it was that meeting that taught her you stand in your own shoes and you get the work done that you have to do. When she returned, I'm showing these two images of Savage presenting a model of the harp to Grover Whalen, who organized the 1939 New York World's Fair, where she was the commissioned artist to do the signature piece, and her bust of James Weldon Johnson, because they're indications to me of just how not only socially acceptable she was, but just the level of respect she was garnering for her work by the 1930s. Savage very quickly moved to the forefront of the art scene in Harlem. And it had a lot to do with what she was grounded in, not only in her training, but also in her experiences, especially in France. When she returned to New York from France in 1932, It was at the height, at 1932, it was at the height of the Great Depression. But she opened a studio, the Savage Studio. And that studio also served as her school. She decided she would teach. She would teach in order to share the things she had learned in Europe with Harlem's young aspiring artists, those who might not have the opportunity to go, and to offer free or pay as you go classes in drafting, painting, printmaking, and sculpture. Some of her prestigious students included Norman Lewis. Norman Lewis attended the Savage School even when he said, I was at that academic place. William Artis was a student, Roma Bearden, Gwendolyn Knight, Jacob Lawrence, and many others. The Savage Studio was more than just a classroom, though. The Savage Studio was her working place, and it was a place where artists and those who were aspiring to become artists could meet and gather and have very serious, both organized and impromptu discussions about the history of art and contemporary art topics. Savage was not at all sensitive about students and others visiting her studio and observing her as she created. So there were multiple levels to the way in which she approached teaching those young members of the Harlem art community. In 1937, it became a model for programming for the WPA that funded what became the Harlem Community Arts Center, a partnership she formed and directed that served more than 1,500 community members in the first 16 months of its existence. To the same extent that she was recognized, excuse me, as an influential teacher and committed activist, she remained renowned as an artist. First established as a portrait sculptor, she was commissioned to create heads of such notables as W.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, and NAACP's leader, William Pickens Sr. Inclined on her own, however, she highlighted subjects, people that she knew, people that were acquaintances, and people who were historical, even mythological characters. People like Gwen Knight, whose head is on the right, and John Henry. What's so intriguing about John Henry, I love her treatment of John Henry because even though she's dealing with a character who is well defined in a narrative based upon his physicality, his humongous size, his muscular structure, his strength, and this is the way that in most cases he is portrayed. This is why I have the images on the right of John Henry's typical portrayal, but how Augusta Savage, as someone who is knowledgeable and adherent to many of the principles of what was the New Negro ideology of dealing with the African American, not just the African American soul, but the African American spirit, that introspective nature, that thinking component of the African American, that very much aligned her with the work of other important sculptors at that time, one being Sergeant Johnson, whose image is at the top left, and William Artis, whose Michael is at the bottom. The fact that she takes her own approach to drawing us into who John Henry was and not just what he did was a very, very radical approach to portraying him in that characterization. So she's still protesting what she called, at one point she wrote and referred to a presumptive expectation in the images of African Americans. And I just wanted to highlight that she saw Gwen Knight as a beautiful model. And Gwen Knight had been a student of hers. When she actually did the piece, Gwen Knight was no longer coming to her studio. She had hooked up, as Savage put it, she had hooked up with another student, a very famous student, Jacob Lawrence. But it's just to show that when she wanted to be literal and highly realistic, she had that capability. One of her most popular pieces, with the exception of the harp, which we'll see in a moment, was Gammon. Gammon is the piece believed to have been modeled after her nephew. And it's the work that was responsible for literally getting her the grant to the fellowship to go to Paris. The founders were so impressed with this image and how she captured the sort of spirit and attitude of any number of young African American males who were called street kids in Harlem at that time. What's kind of sad about Savage's story, it's a positive, negative, I suppose you could say, was the fact that because of her finances, she was not able to cast most of her works in bronze. What she did is she made plaster forms of them. She painted them often with shoe polish and used colorations that appeared to be bronze. Her important work from 1939 is the harp, also known as Lift Every Voice and Sing, inspired by the Negro National Anthem, excuse me, written by James Weldon Johnson. And I like to give John Rosamond Johnson, his brother, credit for also collaborating with him on that. The harp was in her mind, the harp was her masterpiece. It was one of the pieces that she was most proud of. And though it was lost because she could not afford to cast it in bronze, we do have the advantage of a limited number of small replicas, like the one you saw in the earlier photograph of the harp. But it's a beautiful, beautiful translation of the anthem, depicting Black singers as the strings of the instrument, the soundboard, and the arm of the harp being formed as a representation of the hand of God. Again, her financial constraints caused her to not be able to cast this in bronze. And I read a very interesting, obscure little note that Richard Long, Dr. Richard Long of Atlanta, had in his possession. And he said it was a note from County Cullen, and that County Cullen was recorded the comment of a viewer who said, you would think, as important as this image was to the fair and to the history of art making in America, that the fair committee would have found a way to preserve the image. You get a sense of the mammoth size of it, both in the image with Savage, but also in the viewership scene that's on the right. In 1939, Savage wasn't done. She became the first African-American woman in the US to open her own art gallery. She called it the Salon of Contemporary Negro Art. And she devoted that space to showing the work of Black artists. She had initially thought about reserving it for more established artists, but she said if the art is worthy, it will be shown. When she had her first opening of the salon, more than 500 people attended the opening. And Savage made what for a number of decades became a kind of standard quote that people would state when talking about uh, Savage and her thinking about African American art was, she said, "We do not ask any special favors as artists." And she was able to say this because the crowd was mixed. It was a mixed race crowd. "We do not ask any special favors as artists because of our race. We only want to present to you our work and ask that you judge them on their merits." Often, the fruits of her labor were most abundant and sweetest from her perspective through the successes of her students, those she mentored, and her colleagues, especially her colleagues Charles Austin and Hale Woodruff. Not to be minimized was her impact on the social and cultural milieu of the arts community of her era and her pursuit of equality along gender and racial lines. Her friends in Harlem were numerous. Her respect, both in Harlem, in other points of the United States, and in Europe, was widespread. And to this day, I think her impact is still being measured. Nancy Elizabeth Prophet was a Rhode Island native who decided as a teenager that she wanted a career as an artist. And like Savage, she pursued her dream despite the harsh disapproval of her father. She took odd jobs, many of them were domestic related, to pay for Saturday afternoon art instruction classes. When she was older, and she did not go immediately from high school into college because she had to work to pay for it. She was once again getting no support from her family. She enrolled at the Rhode Island School of Design as a painting major. She became the first African American to graduate. And when her hopes of surviving as a portrait painter were dimmed by the compounded difficulty of obtaining commissions, of showing in sufficient number of exhibitions, and securing gallery representation, she followed the example of other young Black artists. And in the fall of 1922, she set sail for Paris, leaving her husband, yes, she had a husband, behind. The first when she got to Paris, Paris was no picnic for Prophet, but she managed to set up small studios and shifted her emphasis from painting to sculpture. She was sick for the first few months after her arrival, but she accounts in her diary about how she dragged herself out of her sickbed and was eventually able to work for a few months on her first model. That model is believed to be an image based upon the likeness of her husband. Her husband's name was Francis Ford. Francis Ford was well educated like her, but she left, as I said, she left her husband at home in Rhode Island, living in the house with her father. When she shifted from sculpture, and she had made this decision prior to arriving in Paris, she quickly enrolled at the academy and worked under the tutelage of Sagofin. Sagofin at the time was highly regarded as an academic sculptor in France and was very respected as a teacher at the academy. It is in some of the works, such as a wooden version. She saw the earlier model in clay as a study, and a model for work for the piece that was subsequently done in wood. We know that this piece was at least completed by 1924 because it was included in an exhibition in Paris, where it was highly, her skill was highly acclaimed. What is also interesting about this piece, once you learn about how Prophet often would use those who were on that short list of friends, is how much people in the Ford family insist that this is an identical image of him. But I'm going to skip that for a moment and go down to, I want you to see Roland Hayes, because Roland Hayes was one of her closest friends at that time. She had 3 people she called her close friends. That was W.B. Du Bois, County Cullen, and Roland Hayes. And I think it's very significant that there was not a woman in that group, but these were her close friends. And this image also bears an interesting resemblance to Roland Hayes. She did do a head of Roland Hayes while she was in Paris. There are those of us who are on a mad manhunt to try to uncover who purchased and has since by now naturally passed down that head. We'd love to discover that head. But she also early on, while in Paris, did this piece called Silence. And it is in works like Silence that you get the sense that not only she's using her own face, starting to use her own face as a model, but we get a better understanding of why in her interview statements and her writing, she speaks so much about not doing portrait heads. She did not consider these to be portrait heads. She said these were translations, these were references, these were indicators of things that were not of the physical world, people's moods, the attitude, the kind of non-physical existence that is attractive, but not one of the forces that you can see with the naked eye. You can just discern it. Silence also was a piece that was created during the time when she was in a tremendously long period of isolation, when most of her earliest works were made. She would attend her classes at the academy, but she would then come home and she would isolate herself. No visitors. She had limited resources. So as she said, she did very little grocery shopping. And she would sometimes lock herself up for weeks at a time and do nothing but take in modest amounts of food, drink teas and water, and carve. I think this piece is very critical, The Pilgrim, not only because it also begins to reflect how Prophet, as someone who could not afford to pay a model, so she used her own, not just her own face, but even in some cases her countenance, because she did do some full-size figures when she was in France. Most of them were destroyed because she could not afford to ship them home, to ship them back to the US when she returned. Prophet was very emotional about who had possession of her works. So just leaving the works to, as she said, to some effervescent future was not something that appealed to her. So many of her full-size, full-scale works that were made in France were destroyed, and they were destroyed by her. The Pilgrim is also a very intriguing piece in her story because this was the title of a publication, a publication that was very prominent in Europe, especially in France and Paris at the time. And it was something that was commonly read by Catholics. Nancy Prophet was raised Catholic. And even though she did not attend Mass, and she was not what we might call devout, um, she still in her own way, excuse me, adhered to some of the fundamental principles of Catholicism, and she read extensively about it. Discontent also is one of those works that reflects her um, adherence and her interest in the tenets of the New Negro movement. I will remind you that she was a very close friend with W.B. Du Bois. W.B. Du Bois was a champion of her work. He was constantly not only encouraging her, but reminding her to interact with people who were important people who were in, excuse me, important people who were in and around Paris, most notably Tanner. I had always believed that her Tanner connection was through Hale Woodruff. Her Tanner connection was actually through W.B. Du Bois, who insisted that she introduced Tanner to her work. Tanner thought Prophet was a genius and joined W.B. Du Bois in labeling her as such. This had a tremendous impact on how Prophet not only saw herself, but her own work. So in Discontent, we see her referencing the contradiction and what I call the multiple mandate of survival that was espoused by Du Bois in his Souls of Black Folk. We see her capturing this in this reference to this condition or the state of being discontent, but shrouding this in the outward appearance of calm, serenity, and control. These were all tenets of the New Negro movement to present figures, individuals in that state, thoughtful, contemplative. And she brings that to bear, but then reminds us that in spite of that, this piece, which was modeled after someone she had a casual conversation with in a Paris cafe, embodied for her many of the principles of the New Negro movement, and especially as that movement evolved in the 1940s. She's very much on the forefront of this as it begins to evolve in the 1940s into the Negritude movement that started literally in France, in around Paris, but was very much embraced in the United States by sculptors. Prophet being in the environment where the energies for that movement are sort of starting out, she was very much capturing and responding to what was going on in that environment. Prophet was a keen observer and had a very sharp, sensitive nature to the kind of creative energies that were around her. Discontent, in the words of County Cullen, another of her short list of friends, he defined discontent. He talked about it in these terms. He said, discontent was a face that was Dante-esque in its tragedy, so powerful in the red polished cowl that envelops it, that it might stand for every spirit of revolt and rebellion. So County Cullen was picking up this kind of controlled anger, so to speak, that Prophet was attempting to embody in this piece. And once again, I just am so intrigued by how some of these images also seem to reflect her knowledge of the kind of facial structure of singer Roland Hayes. And then I wanted to mention briefly Congolese. Congolese is another of those images where prophet is dealing not only with contradiction, but also looking ahead to what is going to be descriptive of much of the work that is made by African American artists in America in the 1940s, that includes Savage, but also Sergeant Johnson, Richmond Barté, and William Artis. But Congolese is this very complex layering of interests that originated after she saw this 1931 exhibition, this international exposition in Paris that included a room that was devoted to Africa. She was intrigued. She went to, according to her diary, she walked through that show every day for weeks, enamored with the presentation of the African art images and the nature of the installations in that exhibition. And so she's responding to that in her own way. She's putting that experience in her own terms. It's very interesting that she, once again, you get the sense that part of what's influencing the kind of forming of the face may be her own. But she's incorporating in that very strong references to Maasai warriors. That's very interesting because she calls the piece Congolese, which makes you think, okay, this should be a reference to at least a people that reside in the region of the Congo. But by doing this, by kind of referring to multiple regions of the continent, it's very possible that one of the things she's reminding us of is the Western tendency to speak of Africa in monolithic terms, but she's also unifying what will later be referred to as diaspora. W.B. Du Bois at this time is calling it Pan-Africanism. But she's also referring to this kind of unifying place that is a seat of origin for a number of people who are living in other parts of the world, which we've referred to as the African diaspora. It's also interesting that she references the male in the Maasai, in the hairdressing, in the use of the cherry wood, which is it was most common for Maasai especially when they were about to go into battle or into hunt, to put the red henna on their faces. So she's making all of these subtle references to one part of Africa through the imagery, but making a reference to another part through the title. And then by incorporating her own face, she makes a very strong tie. She's connecting those dots and coming back to what Du Bois was calling Pan-Africanism, what we refer to in contemporary terms as the diaspora. And then I know I'm spending a lot on her, but I love her. Here's the head of a Cossack. Once again, she's fusing references to multiple ethnic groups. Cossacks were more than once the sort of topical subject for issues of the Le Pèlerin. But there's also traces of, once again, her knowledge and her incorporation of what appears to be the features of Roland Hayes. And just very briefly, I'll mention that she did do two-dimensional, what we call low three-dimensional, some of us, her reliefs. And it's just important to note that she also reconciled with her father, and uh, how she presented that in her artwork was to do this larger than life size mask that was based on the features of her father's face. She did come to Spelman. Uh, she was a teacher. It would have been wonderful to spend more time with that, but I thought her work was just much more intriguing. And the period that she was in France prior to coming to the U.S. was the time in her life when she was most productive, when she was most verbal about her work, when she was showing most vigorously, and when she was doing the work that has come to represent her capabilities as a uh, highly skilled sculptor. New Haven native Norma Morgan was a fascinating painter and printmaker who lived and worked intermittently in Woodstock between 1969 and circa 2010. She was drawn to art making at a young age, liking to draw as a child, and picking up a paintbrush for the first time when she was 9 to retouch the flowers on their wallpaper that was damaged by mildew. As a teenager, she recalled that her passion for drawing sailboats came from loving the feeling of being free to sail away in her imagination to all sorts of strange places. Also, while in high school, she was introduced to illustrator and cartoonist Elton Fax. Elton Fax would later emerge as an important writer, and that book included 17 Black artists. And Norma Morgan was one of those 17 artists that were highlighted in that publication. She attended the Art Students League, joined the Atelier 17 in New York, and this was where her affinity for intaglio techniques were likely most encouraged and developed to the master levels that she subsequently achieved. It was probably the result of self-teaching. And I say self-teaching because she often spoke about the fact that there was no real formal education that took part there. People went to work, and she was a very achieved painter, and she said how to observe artists at work. And so she was a good observer. And it was the result of what she said her printmaking was the result of self-teaching and observing what was going on in the workshop, watching, learning from others, and working out her own solutions. Engraving was appealing and possible to its accomplished extent because she was already a meticulous painter. Her imagery, evolving from sketches and her imagination, and her knowledge of how to create synergy between those two things. There was also the possible role of Robert Blackburn's print workshop, which she did participate in at some point in time. The Blackburn printmaking workshop was a place where artists could experiment and perfect their printmaking skills. And she did benefit from that. It's intriguing to explore how she translates all of this into her handling of figures. These two images reflect in some ways the sort of tone that she expressed when she talked about her paintings of sailors, her drawings of sail ships, the kind of free-flowing, responding to nature in the left, the tide traveler. It's an embodiment of a state of being that puts the figure in a very kind of isolated landscape. And it's the kind of focal attention to what I call the central character that became a kind of standard way in which she draws you into her imagery and forces you to see tiny other little things, like that little slither of a horizon in the back. But it's important to get the sense of the fact that this figure is literally falling. Is he falling? Is he tripping? Is he just so exhausted? Will he survive? You know, there's even I remember showing this to some students once, and they said, is he fainting? Is he falling? Or is he dying? And I said, that's the kind of conversation you have to bring to the piece. There's also this kind of freedom that she referenced in talking about sailing, that you get a sense of that is sort of synonymous with being youthful, being uninhibited in ways that you are not once you reach across a certain age threshold, and the kind of it's a figure that it's a figure that is unified in such a way that even though they're separate beings, you get the sense of oneness in their posturing, in their cloaking, and you will see a figure that references that in some subsequent in some earlier works, as well as some subsequent works. But I think what's most fascinating about Norma Morgan is the way in which she, like some very important African-American landscape painters, Duncanson and Bannister being the ones that first come to mind, the way in which she captures the atmospheric forces of nature and the impact of that on things that stand within it, on those landscapes. Narratives, the writings of I would say British writers, people like Thomas Hart, Emily and Charlotte Bronte's, I think were favorites of hers. And she captured the romanticized landscapes of particularly Robert Duncanson, who did a number of landscapes where the scenes of Scotland were really the leading characters in his imagery. And she was very attracted to those images. She also makes it very clear that she liked Rembrandt. It's easy to see that she emulates that sort of what I call that Rembrandt-esque light, use of lighting, and her very careful detail, even in the deep shadows of many of her images, that's very much reflective of the highly skilled works of Rembrandt. But her images are stories, they're narratives in ways that are mysterious outside of the kind of cerebral exercises that we were drawn into in the work of someone like Prophet. It's not about so much the people as it is the impact of nature on people and things. Eroding stones, winds that cause decay, weathering that causes decay, And it's even sort of referenced. I love the way in which she talks about characters in narratives, but still makes a part of that characterization the land and the atmosphere that is around them. I consider Harriet to be a masterwork by Norma Morgan because she not only captures the spirituality of Harriet Tubman, she captures that sense of oneness with God. She captures that sense of oneness with the nature that's around her. She has to find a way to understand, interpret, and read nature. It's the key to her survival, and it's the conduit to her leading others to freedom. And Morgan has a way in this image of Harriet to really capture all of that and compress it in a simple presentation of a figure and a ground. And she does that equally well with David in the wilderness, uh, where you get a sense of the whole idea of the struggle that is emotional, it's mental, and it's spiritual. All of that is going on in these works, and it very much uh, paints a different kind of narrative of Tubman the person who she is. And it's very different from even interpretations of Tubman by prominent African American artists, including Elizabeth Catlett, whose work is shown at the top on the left, and Charles White, whose Moses of her people is at the on the bottom left, and how in those images, as in most image, she is typically portrayed as this almost larger than life giant being, not so much because of her physicality, but because of who she is and what she does. Uh, in those images, she's a doer. She is a doer. She is an activist. She is in action. She is forceful. She is mammoth. In Norma Morgan's portrayal, she is not so much a doer as she is a being. She is a being. She has a spiritual presence. She has a certain power that is understated because of her spirituality. So she comes at her at a very different angle and portrays a part of Harriet Tubman that is a story, a Tubman story that is seldom told. And I will just briefly let you see a number of a banister at the bottom and the top, and this whole thing of the approaching storm, in some of like in Norma Morgan's imagery, in some of the works by Bannister as well as Duncanson, uh, the figure is put in in a situation where they're at the mercy of the environment in which they are portrayed, and it's nature, it's nature, it's the material of nature, it's the atmosphere, but it's also a comment of a certain part of what we call a dwelling place or a living place. It's more of a countryside. It's not rural. Uh, it's not bustling. It's sort of the individual. It's like the old man in the sea. It's that individual strength in the presence of of nature and life forces, and she captures that very well. And at the same time, her structures, her buildings, her homes, her cabins, uh, they're almost animated. They're as alive as the atmosphere that is presented around them and those figures. And just two other presentations of just the way she devotes so much drama in a quiet, understated manner. It's not even on the what I would call the high dramatic level of even Duncanson's work. There's a quiet nature to her landscape narratives, but there at the same time you get the sense of the power of the force and the vulnerability of the objects that are contained within the atmosphere and the weathering and what I call the erosion that is a part, the transformative nature of things that is a part of being alive. I just wanted to show one of her watercolors because they capture the same intensity, the same essence, that whole idea of this form in a landscape, in a space where that form is sort of consumed by all of the things that are natural around it, and that it's at the mercy of those things to a certain extent. And I think her watercolors are probably the format that she adhered to most in the latter part of her life. She was highly regarded, collected, and exhibited mostly prior to the year 2000. And I think that one of the most the most amazing things that could be done, I would say, to her legacy is for there to be a revival of that level of
So it looks like we got a
and
little bit of a technical glitch. Oh, okay.
a little glitch, and I'm just talking.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. So it
Oh,
looks
I'm
like,
good. I'm good. Okay. Okay.
absolutely. Go back to share screening. And thank you
Okay.
for everyone for staying with us. It is 8 o'clock, but we do
Oh,
have
I'm sorry. I knew I would do that. I'm
oh,
sorry.
it's such good material. So
Okay.
by all means, anyone who
I
has to,
apologize.
oh, they're fine. Anyone who has to leave, there'll be a recording of the program later, and you'll be able to watch the whole thing. And for those of you that can stay, thank you so much. We might not be able to get to too many questions at the end, but we get all this good content. So Amalia.
Well, you know what? Camille will be, I'll just move on to Camille if I can. Oh, I messed up again, I think. Let's see.
We see it well. There we go. Now we're moving.
Okay, I wanted to, let me go ahead and talk about Camille.
Wonderful. Yeah, no,
Camille is wonderful. Camille was wonderful. You know, Camille Billops, God, she's amazing. She was amazing. Her career consisted of printmaking, sculpture, book illustration, and filmmaking. And I did say sculpture. I hope I said sculpture because she started out as a sculpture, but I wanted to start with two images of her so you could see though. Camille was really had two very strong sides to her personality and her creative self. There was a very serious Camille. When Camille, I don't know if anyone watching ever had the opportunity to observe her working in her studio. I had that fortune, and she went into her zone. And she was intense, as you can see on the intense and very serious. And you could talk to her, but don't touch her. Camille did not like to be touched. But there was this other side that was very free, uninhibited, and this shows her as early as when she was in her teens, at her home, family home in Los Angeles. But when she went on to get her degrees at Cal State and at City College in New York, her primary medium initially was sculpture. And she did these very large scale sculptures that were influenced very much by Eastern culture. But she said the Eastern culture with, with the Black flair. And that was Camille. Camille was always doing what I called a blending of cultural influences. It was a part of her dress, it was a part of her artwork, and it was a part of her conversation. She was a longtime friend and colleague of Robert Blackburn, whom she assisted in establishing the first printmaking workshop in Morocco in the 70s. And as I stated, her prints, even though she started as a sculptor, she did a number of prints, especially in the 70s when she was very involved with Blackburn on a regular basis. And she often worked with imagery that related to performance. Performance was an interesting sort of jumping off point for her because it touched on so many areas. It touched on cultural expression. It touched on cultural differences. It touched on cultural appropriations. It touched on racial issues. She talked about how ironic it was that white only audiences would clamor to things like the Savoy and the Cotton Club to see Black performers at a time when there was so much racial segregation in America. So she talked about this kind of contradictory, conflicting, confusing aura that was around performance. I am Black, I am Black, I am dangerously Black is one of the works where she's addressing sort of these historical significances, her own, what she called revolutionary spirit, her own determination to be, as she said, the kind of artist she wanted to be. And we'll later learn the extent to which she would make sacrifices to be that person. But she also saw art as a way of archiving information. So the work may appear to be about a single subject, but through additions to that image, writing, as she said, writing, attaching icons, gesturing, certain things that contain subtle cultural and ethnic clues also render the image as not just an image about a subject that's you're sort of led to by the title. You have to really study the image for all of the nuances of additional information that are contained within it. And that's very much the case with these two works. Mammy's Little Cold Black Rose and Por Que No are works that came from, she said she discovered these, she was in a garage and discovered these this box of old sheet music. And she said the lyrics and everything, they were so racist. She said, did the people realize what they were saying? And she assumed that many of these things had come from what she called old ragtime type performances, but it gave her ideas, and she started incorporating them into her work. Where Camille is probably going to be most remembered as an artist for having the greatest impact is probably her films. Uh, Her films, such as KKK Boutique, which really sets the tone for the ways in which these are the kinds of films that set the tone for the ways in which she would talk about her personal life and racial issues beginning in the 1970s until the time of her death. KKK Boutique, Ain't Just Rednecks, was her a way of, and these are two prints, by the way, that were inspired from some of the stills in the KKK Boutique film that she did. But the film very much addresses how the the carriage of what she called uh, the carriage of the racial attitudes in America are not just restricted to poor Southern whites. And she talked about how others would essentially hide behind the overtness of Southern whites. And therefore, the KKK Boutique is not just about rednecks. She even goes into all of the what she called the interstructures of the cultural behavior within minority groups. She said, you know, you don't have to look far to go to other places as well as parts of the US. She said, meaning most of the US, meaning all of the US, to see that there are concerns within cultural and ethnic groups about things like skin color and size. So the KKK Boutique is one of the films that opens up that discussion. But it's also important that Camille and her husband, Jim Hatch, created the Hatch Billops Archive, the archive that really is an extensive overview of creativity along literary, visual art, music, dance, almost every aspect of creative life of African Americans is touched on in that archive. And it's an archive that they pretty much worked on together. But if anyone knew Camille Billops, we knew who was driving that train, and it was very much Camille. Suzanne was the film that opens up what she said. She opened that kettle of fish in her own personal life. It was not typical, she said, for Black folk to add their dirty laundry the way she did. But Suzanne was a film, she said, that needed to be done because other people needed to know that this was not a problem that was unique to them. Suzanne was a title that she said she used because when her niece Suzanne would come to her and she was high on drugs, and she would tell her all the things that she was going through and what she was putting her children through. She said, all I could say as an aunt who cared was, oh, Suzanne. And she said, this is what you say when you don't want to be critical, because that doesn't help. And you don't know what to do because you're not trained to do it. And you love the person that's sitting across from you. So she decided to talk about, with Suzanne's permission, to talk about what life was like for her and her family in this film. But Camille had some crosses to bear herself. And in addition to Suzanne, she did two other films that were very much about members of her family. One of the most humorous was Older Women in Love, where she takes an elder in her family talking about her affair with her considerably younger lover. But it's Camille's relationship with her daughter that causes, I think, the greatest conversation, interrogation, and investigation of her film work. And that's her daughter, Krista. Finding Krista has been the recipient of a Sundance Film Festival Prize. It has been featured on public broadcasting, and it has brought Camille a considerable amount of attention to her film work as a result of that final, what she called her final film that really aired who she and her family really were. She said, not for the sake of hurting anyone, but the sake of saying, here I am, this is what we are, and this is what people do. She said she says it's an interesting title, Finding Krista, because the film is really about Krista finding her. And when she gave her daughter up, put her daughter up for adoption, it was in a cloud of tremendous controversy, because once she made the decision that she would allow someone to adopt her 4-year-old, several of her family members gathered together, had a family meeting, called her in and said, we want to make a case for you giving her to one of us. Camille talked about how she'll never forget driving to the house in that little Volkswagen, walking into what was her mother's home, announcing to everyone that Krista was her daughter and it was her decision to make and she had made it, taking her to a children's home, telling Krista to go in there and use the restroom. And when Krista entered the building, she pulled off. Reuniting with Krista as an adult was something she feared, but she said she got the word that Krista was looking for her, and she said, I need to try to find her before she finds me. She got her husband's, I think it was her husband's son, actually did the filming of their meeting. And they had their very first encounter in New Jersey. I believe it was at the train station in New Jersey. And she said from that moment on, the die was cast and the film was set. And I will close with this little clip from Finding Krista.
Who's that?
My daughter,
What daughter?
Krista. When she was 4, I gave her up for adoption, so you didn't know about her. And I just heard from her, and it's on this tape. Why did you leave me? I was trying to give her something else because I felt she needed a mother and a father. I'm sorry about the pain it caused Krista as a young child. I'm very sorry about her hurt, but I'm not sorry about the act. She was saying, somebody's pregnant. I've been dreaming of seawater. I said, ain't me, mama. I said, you know, Alma's pregnant in Jersey. And I was so busy trying to divert her attention from me. But there I was, 9 months later, with Tina and Beverly at my baby shower, and no husband.
Uh-oh, I don't want to play it again, I'm sorry. I was trying to get to the last slide, but there we go. Just wanted you to see an image of Camille with Krista. It was kind of exemplary, that film, of who Camille Billops really, really was. She was in your face. Pretty much what came up came out. And she was very clear about who she was and what she wanted to do, and never apologized for making the decision she did about her daughter, and felt that it was a decision that only she had the right to make. Krista preceded her in death, unfortunately. And Camille, I remember, took that very hard because she and her daughter had been estranged again for a period of about 3 years. And the last conversation I had with Camille when Krista came up, because one thing about her after her daughter's death, she had a heart condition and did not want to have the surgery that was recommended by physicians. In her last years, Camille, whenever I spoke with her, brought up Krista. And in none of those conversations did she feel or express remorse, seem to feel or express remorse about the decision she made, hoping that she was putting Krista in a place where she would have two parents. She often referred to the fact that she did not want either of their lives to be over without them having reconciled. So she was really grieving the fact that not only that Krista was gone, but that their relationship had not been on a positive note when she left. I will close with that. And if there are any questions, I would love to entertain them. And thank you, those of you who stayed with us. Thank you so very much.
We'll do a couple of Q&A. Amalia, if you wouldn't mind ending your share.
No, what do I take my slide away?
Oh, yes, ma'am. If you'll
Okay.
end the screen share, then we'll get a full screen of you.
Stop share. Is that what you want?
Yeah, perfect.
Hello.
Hello, they were so amazing. And we had so many people stay. Everybody.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Everybody was riveted. Well, we'll figure we have, let's see, we got at least 2 questions in the Q&A. I'm going to allow one person to ask you a question live, and then I'll read the two ones real quick. We'll make sure to wrap it up in the next couple of minutes. And let's do Brenda. I'm going to do this. So real quick, I'm going to go ahead and done Brenda. So go ahead and start your video, Brenda. Do I see you? And then you'll have to accept the position. While Brenda works on that, I'm going to read one. Oh, there we go. There we go.
Hey, Brenda. Hi, Brenda.
There we go. Brenda, please ask Amalia.
Amalia, you were wonderful as always.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you.
I knew about so many of them, but I didn't know about Prophet as much. And so I really, really grew from that one. And from every one of them. But Prophet, I just didn't know her work. And thank you for your way of presenting. One of the things I wondered, did you realize that, for me at least, it was Camille that introduced me to the work of Norma Morgan?
Yes, I did. I didn't know that about you, but I can say the same for myself. She considered herself someone of an art dealer for Norma, I think.
She did.
Yeah, she did. She did. She often said, well, and she said, now, Norma doesn't print, how Camille talks. Now, Norma doesn't print now until she has a sale, because Norma's not young anymore. And she said she can't be spending her time speculating. So if she's got a sale, she'll print, but she's not just going to print in the hope that somebody will buy it. And I thought that was so hilarious. But her relationship with Norma Morgan was a long one. And I think, if I remember correctly, if I remember correctly, she indicated that she and Norma became friends through Blackburn.
Okay.
I think Blackburn was the link to the two of them.
She loved the craftsmanship, she said, of her work.
Oh,
And thank you for explaining Camille some more. She was a wonderful person. Thank you.
I think is there another question down there?
Megan, is there another question?
Looks like there were two.
You're muted,
You're
Megan.
still
Sorry about that. I make all these like noises when Amalia's talking, and I wanted to make sure not to.
None of them were going.
So the questions, now that you can hear me, is that I have one right here that seems as though Savage and Prophet were peers. Did they have any interaction, or were they aware of each other?
They were, and I should have mentioned this if I didn't, that when Savage first went to Paris in 1931, she literally stayed initially with Prophet. It was arranged by Du Bois. Du Bois told her, when you go to Paris, get in touch with Prophet, but he forgot to tell Prophet that she was coming. So Nancy Prophet, being the very private person that she was, I don't think was that thrilled to see Savage show up at her studio. But they survived the situation, and at one point there was a reference from Hale Woodruff, where Woodruff made a comment when Prophet joined him at Spelman in the AUC in the later 1930s, mid 1930s. He made a reference to, he said something to the effect that Augusta Savage sends her regards. So you got the sense that there was at least a professional kind of colleagueship that was going on there. But yeah, they were very much aware of each other's work, by the way.
Definitely looked like there was an interface there. I mean, just
yeah. And a big part of that, keeping up with their work, a big part of that was actually through Du Bois and Crisis magazine.
I mean, the connections are just amazing here.
Yeah.
Oh, and perfect. We have one more question for you before we'll call it for the evening. It's go ahead whenever you're ready.
Me?
Yes, Darrell.
Oh, great, thanks.
Yes.
So the WPA art centers, they were technically unemployed, like because of unemployment, because of the Great Depression.
Yes.
And I heard that, not only was Augusta Savage's sculpture, The Heart, destroyed, but it might have even been some plot to make her lose her job because she got paid work for a year. So because of that, she's no longer unemployed. So she actually lost her job. And I wondered if you had heard about that.
No, I hadn't, but I shouldn't say that. There was some unresolved conversations about her sort of transitioning out as director. And I think it was when Alston came in as director and sort of transformed that into another collective in Harlem. But I'm not sure about that. That could be, but the thing with The Heart that I really have to go back to, and I do, I do wonder a lot about the comment that County Cullen overheard, where someone alluded to the fact that had she not been African American, that they probably would have preserved the harp. That was totally in the purview of the fair to allocate resources to preserving that, especially after she had been commissioned to do it, and they gave it it got a tremendous amount of attention. But when I'm not sure that she was not, that's something I'll have to look into. I'm not sure as the director of the center that what the payment arrangement was. But you're sort of right. That was supposed to subsidize artists who were unemployed. Artists who weren't receiving revenue for their work because of the depression. That's an interesting question.
And if you want a
Girl,
more,
you're gonna make me go dig. Which is good. I love that. I love that because that is I never thought about that as being a potential problem. But the other side of that is they obviously didn't pay her enough to get the thing bronzed.
Yeah.
You have to wonder what the payout for that actually was.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Dorel, if you want to pop your preferred email in the chat, I can pass it.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Yeah, and that way, Amalia, if you come up with any additional information.
Yes. Oh yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
Well,
But don't you think it's sad? She only has like maybe a dozen works that have survived because she could not afford to,
it's so sad.
And she was such a committed teacher. She spent a lot of her resources buying materials and supplies for her students who couldn't afford to buy them.
Yeah, and all those bronzes were cast after she was dead, and who profited from those?
Yeah.
I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Very good
Yeah.
point.
I think Kerry Davis had raised his hand, Megan, and maybe that would be it for the
Great way to end.
Great way to end.
Carrie will, as a little introduction, Carrie is the amazing art collector whose collection was highlighted in the Seen Unseen exhibition, which combined works from his collection and 32 regional creators. And Amalia's work is part of Carrie's collection. So without further ado, thank you everyone for your questions. We'll throw it to Carrie and he'll end it right there. 1 second. Carrie will pop on.
There he is. Come on, Carrie.
Just up and see it. And
There
then
he is.
Hey,
I asked him to
Hello, Carrie.
you'll have to unmute yourself,
Unmute,
Kerry.
unmute.
Hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Amalia, before you glitched up, or maybe I froze, you were speaking about Norma Morgan,
Mhm.
and I don't know if you finished your thought or didn't finish your thought. You were saying something about what your wishes were for Norma's legacy.
No, I just wish that I would like to see a revival of interest in her work on the level that she experienced especially in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where there was a tremendous amount of attention being given to her work, both here in the States and in Europe, especially in Britain. And it would just be nice to see that kind of, not just the exhibitions, but even the dialogue around her work. See, I was amazed at how well received her work was in previous decades. It wasn't always, you mentioned Norma Morgan even now to some collectors, and they don't know who she was. And, but that was kind of unheard of on the Black art scene, especially up until, I would say, like, it seems that it seems that it's something happened in that 80s window, perhaps when what I call that I Me generation art was proliferating the art scene, that her kind of art making kind of was sort of pushed back. That her work is so highly academic in terms of the techniques she used and so it wasn't and I love Basquiat, okay, just for the record, but you know, Basquiat explodes on the scene, and that whole 80s generation thing. And I think the more academic kind of imagery, especially that African Americans were making, sort of got pushed back and was replaced by, you know, that new energy that occurred in the 80s, and a lot of it was around Basquiat.
I think
That's what I was saying. I'd just like to see a return to that, because I've never had an issue with having both. You know, you celebrate the newness, but you also respect that all of this stuff evolves. And her work is so unique. That's the other aspect of it. It's so unique. So that's what I was saying. I didn't even go to that extent, but that's what I
Okay, yeah.
Well, hopefully that'll happen, you know,
Yeah.
that happens, you know, people go out of favor and then they're rediscovered again. So that would be really interesting to see that happen to her work, I think.
especially, you know, to put that against this,
Mhm.
because she did these things where that isolated form in sort of that atmospheric you know, ground, and there's so much imagery now that's it's very different, you know, it's very very technical looking, but that concept of isolating that form, I have a name for it that makes some artists mad, but I use it anyway. You know, it's that you know, it's that Nike thing, you know, that image with that blank background, you know, it's that, but in some ways, you know, it's not that different from formally how she presented an object, sort of in its own kind of atmospheric space. So it'd be nice to have those energies tugging at each other in an exhibition, in my opinion.
Yeah, interesting.
But thank you, ladies. This has been quite
Well,
a
thank
treat.
you. Thank you so much.
been
It's been a
great.
pleasure having you on and hearing your stories too. This has been great. I'd like to thank everyone who you know, stuck it out too to the end, and it's been a great presentation.
Well, thank you.
I think I feel like you could have been longer even with some of your stories, because you know, very well presented. So I'd just like to mention, for those of you who are still on, that the archives is open still Wednesday through Saturday, our regular hours. And we have a great show up, Beyond Surface. And we also have a show up virtually online going on, the New Now 2021. So please check that out, because that's going to end pretty soon. And we're looking forward to our members exhibition in April. Please remember to take the survey at the end. And I'd just like to thank everybody again. And hopefully we can all throw our Jansen art history books out soon. Because, you know, this stuff just isn't in there and it needs to be. So ladies who are artists and writers out there, take up your pens and let's change history. Okay. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
That was a great ending statement, by the way.
Well done. Good night, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.